There are tax rises coming down the track.
Yeah, but I think that this
Yes.
government are making, in terms of the ambition of this government, it is big.
But
we've
you
got to
agreed, yes,
always,
there are tax rises coming down the
well,
track.
I was really clear during the general election campaign, and we discussed this many times, that I would always make sure that the numbers add up. And of course, challenges are being thrown our way, but I won't duck those challenges. Of course, we're looking at tax and spending as well, but the numbers will always add up with me as Chancellor. That is why we're putting all the effort into growing our economy, because that in the end is what brings in the tax revenues to be able to afford to keep taxes low and to invest in our public services.
Can you say the end of the doom loop will be this year will put an end to the doom loop?
Well, I'm not sure if I would use those words, because our economy in the first half of this year was the strongest growing economy in the G7.
Reeves signals disaster, the tax raid coming from Middle England. If you thought your savings were safe, think again. If you believed your pension was untouchable, you might want to sit down for this. Welcome to British News Blog, where we cut through the noise and deliver the political truth that Westminster would rather you didn't hear. Before we dive into what could be the most significant tax offensive in a generation, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what's coming will affect every single person watching this video, and you'll want to stay informed as this unfolds. Rachel Reeves has just fired a warning shot across the bow of Middle England, and the Chancellor's words have sent shockwaves rippling through every suburb, every market town, every carefully mortgaged semi-detached home in this country. Those with the broadest shoulders, she says, will need to pay their fair share. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Almost noble. But here's what she's not saying clearly. Here's what's lurking beneath that carefully crafted political rhetoric. Your home, your pension, your life savings, everything you've worked decades to build could be firmly in the crosshairs of the next budget. And the truly chilling part, she's basing her targets not on what you earn through honest work, but on what you own. Your assets, the things you've already paid tax on, the nest egg you thought was secure. Let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here. The Chancellor has ruled out a specific wealth tax. She's been very careful to say those exact words. But in the same breath, in that deliciously duplicitous way that only seasoned politicians can master, she's made it abundantly clear that measures which do tax wealth and do tax wealthy people are very much on the table. It's rather like someone promising they won't punch you in the face, then immediately clarifying that slapping, kicking, and general roughing up remain viable options. The distinction, you see, is technical. The impact is precisely the same. Your wallet gets lighter, and the Treasury's coffers get heavier. The timing of all this couldn't be more suspect or more revealing. The economy, that grand barometer of governmental competence, grew by a truly pathetic 0.1% in August. To put that in perspective, that's essentially standing still while claiming you're making progress. In June, it actually shrank by 0.1%. The UK economy, ladies and gentlemen, stalled over the summer like an old banger struggling up a hill. And what does our Chancellor propose as the solution? Not stimulating growth, not encouraging investment, not making Britain an attractive place to do business. No, she's planning to raid the pockets of those who've actually managed to accumulate something despite the economy's spectacular mediocrity. Now, if you're sitting there thinking this doesn't apply to you, that you're not one of those wealthy people with the broadest shoulders, allow me to disabuse you of that comforting notion. Subscribe now if you haven't already, because understanding who the government considers wealthy might be the most important revelation you'll hear today. When politicians talk about taxing the wealthy, they're almost never talking about actual wealth, the oligarchs with offshore accounts and property portfolios spanning continents. They're talking about you, the middle-class homeowner, the diligent saver, the person who sacrificed holidays and luxuries to build a pension pot, the landlord with a couple of buy-to-let properties who thought they were securing their retirement. You are the broadest shoulders. You are the fair share. You are the target. Inheritance tax, the delightful levy that ensures the government gets to dip into your estate even after you're dead, is reportedly in for a hammering. Because apparently, leaving something to your children after a lifetime of paying income tax, national insurance, council tax, VAT, stamp duty, and every other fiscal extraction the state can devise is just too much to ask. Your retirement schemes, those pension pots you've been feeding for decades, could be next. And landlords, those convenient villains of modern political discourse, are bracing for impact. Never mind that many of them are ordinary people who invested in property as a retirement strategy, not property magnates with vast empires. When the Chancellor needs to fill a gaping financial black hole, nuance is the first casualty. Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride has put it rather succinctly. Under Labour, nothing is safe. Not your home, not your pension, not your savings. It's a stark warning, delivered with the kind of clarity that cuts through political waffle. He's called on Reeves to show some real backbone and control government spending rather than, and I rather like this phrase, shaking down the taxpayer again. Because that's what this is, isn't it? A shakedown. A raid. The government has spent beyond its means, made promises it can't keep, and now it's coming for those who've been prudent, who've saved, who've invested in their futures. And the business community is terrified. Alan Vallance, Chief Executive of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, has warned that Britain faces a damaging cliff edge if the Chancellor raids businesses again in next month's budget. Business confidence is fragile, investment is stalling, and everyday decisions are slowed by complexity, cost, and uncertainty. This is the language of an economy on the brink, not one preparing for growth and prosperity. When accountants start using apocalyptic imagery, you know things are serious. Make sure you're subscribed because what I'm about to tell you next shows just how desperate things have become. The boss of Whitbread, the company that owns Premier Inn, has fired a warning shot at the Chancellor, urging her to steer clear of further punitive tax increases for businesses. Dominic Paul has also taken aim at Labour's Workers' Rights Bill, which he says is making it harder for companies to grow. Think about that for a moment. The head of one of Britain's largest hospitality companies is publicly pleading with the government not to make doing business even more difficult than it already is. That's not normal political discourse. That's a distress signal. And then there's the truly farcical proposal that perfectly encapsulates how far down the rabbit hole we've tumbled. The Tories have accused Labour of plotting a taxi tax grab, with ministers refusing to rule out slapping VAT on private hire fares. Yes, you heard that correctly. The government might start taxing your Uber rides, your taxi home after a night out, your necessary transport if you live in a rural area or have a disability. When politicians start eyeing up taxi fares as a revenue stream, you know they've well and truly run out of sensible options. It's the fiscal equivalent of rummaging down the back of the sofa for loose change, except the sofa belongs to hard-working people just trying to get from A to B. The Chancellor, to her credit, has promised targeted action to deal with cost of living challenges. Plans to cut energy bills are apparently on the table. How generous, how magnanimous. She'll take billions from your savings and pensions, hammer your inheritance, and tax your taxi rides. But don't worry, she might shave a few pounds off your electricity bill. It's rather like a burglar who rifles through your valuables but graciously leaves you the loose change on the dresser. The cost of living crisis isn't happening in isolation. It's happening because of government policy, because of economic mismanagement, because of decisions made in Westminster that ripple out to affect every household in the country. And speaking of the cost of living, let's talk about inflation, shall we? That insidious thief that quietly erodes the value of everything you've saved. Inflation hit 3.8% in the 12 months to August. The Chancellor herself has admitted the situation is too high. Well, that's a relief. At least she's noticed. The IMF has predicted that the UK will face higher inflation than any other leading economy this year and next. Read that again. Higher than any other leading economy. We're not just doing badly, we're leading the pack in economic dysfunction. Britain, that once great economic power, is now distinguished primarily by having the worst inflation in the developed world. If you value staying informed about how these policies will impact your life, hit that subscribe button now, because the news gets even better. Octopus, the UK's biggest energy supplier, has warned that electricity prices will soar by a staggering 20% within the next 4 or 5 years unless the government takes drastic action. The energy price cap has already been raised by 2% this month, pushing average annual bills to an eye-watering £1,755. So let me paint you a picture of what the Chancellor is offering. Higher taxes on your assets, possible raids on your pension and savings, stagnant economic growth, the worst inflation in the developed world, and energy bills that will continue climbing unless drastic action is taken. And what is that drastic action? Well, based on current form, probably more taxes. There's a pattern emerging here, and it's not a comforting one. Every problem, every challenge, every self-inflicted wound seems to have the same solution. Extract more money from the people who are still managing to keep their heads above water. The economy isn't growing, so tax more. Inflation is running rampant, so tax more. Energy prices are soaring, so promise relief while simultaneously raiding pensions. It's an approach that might fill treasury coffers in the short term, but it's economically illiterate in the long term. You cannot tax your way to prosperity. You cannot build a thriving economy by punishing success and penalizing prudence. Middle England, that great backbone of British society, is being squeezed from every direction. Wages that don't keep pace with inflation. House prices that make property ownership increasingly unattainable for the next generation. Energy bills that consume an ever larger chunk of household budgets. And now, a chancellor who's made it abundantly clear that if you've managed to accumulate any assets despite all these headwinds, well, the government would quite like a larger slice of those too. The implicit message is clear. Saving is for mugs, investment is for the taxman's benefit, and building something for your family's future is an act of naive optimism. What's particularly galling about all this is the language being used. The broadest shoulders. Fair share. These are carefully focused grouped phrases designed to make wealth extraction sound like a moral imperative. They are meant to make you feel guilty for having worked hard, saved diligently, and accumulated assets. They are designed to paint targets on the backs of ordinary middle-class people, while making it sound like we're going after oligarchs and plutocrats. It's linguistic sleight of hand, and it's remarkably effective. Because who can argue against people with broad shoulders carrying more weight? It sounds so reasonable, so fair, until you realize that by broad shoulders, they mean anyone who owns a home, has a pension, or has managed to save anything at all. The Shadow Chancellor's warning that nothing is safe under Labour isn't hyperbole. It's an accurate assessment of a government that sees the accumulated wealth of its citizens not as a sign of a functioning economy, but as an untapped resource to be plundered. Your home, which you've been paying a mortgage on for decades, which you've already paid stamp duty on, which you pay council tax on every year, could face additional taxation. Your pension, into which you've been putting post-tax income for your entire working life, could be raided. Your savings, already being eroded by inflation, could be targeted. And your inheritance, the final expression of a lifetime's work, could be taxed so heavily that what you leave to your children is a fraction of what you intended. This isn't just about tax policy. This is about the fundamental relationship between citizen and state. It's about whether the government exists to serve the people or to extract maximum revenue from them. It's about whether we live in a country that rewards hard work and prudent planning, or one that punishes success and redistributes wealth based on political expediency. The answers to these questions matter enormously, and they'll shape Britain's economic future for decades to come. So what can you do? First, stay informed. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because as this budget approaches, the details will matter enormously. Understand what's being proposed, who it affects, and what the long-term implications are. Second, make your voice heard. Contact your MP, make it clear that Middle England isn't a piggy bank to be raided whenever the government overspends. And third, plan accordingly. Speak to financial advisors, understand your options, and protect your assets within the bounds of the law. Because make no mistake, this tax raid is coming, and those with the broadest shoulders had better brace for impact. Rachel Reeves has laid her cards on the table. The only question now is how much she'll take, and from whom. The answer, I suspect, will leave a lot of people significantly poorer and wondering what happened to the country that used to celebrate aspiration and reward hard work. Stay tuned to British News Blog, because we'll be following every development, every broken promise, and every raid on your wallet. Subscribe now, and we'll see you in the next video where we continue to hold power to account.